Alright, it looks like I've got sound up and running again. I apologize, everybody. I've been trying to figure this out for a little bit now. Let me just log on to YouTube real quick and make sure I got it. And as long as I see that I have sound, I will get this thing rolling. My apologies in advance to everybody who signed on at 5:30, waiting for me. I signed on and did not get any sound for a very good chunk of time, and now just got it, or at least I'm seeing it. Let me triple check. And as long as I see that I have sound, I will get this thing rolling. My apologies. We're good. All right. Sorry, everybody, for the delay, and now you're going to kind of hear everything go backwards. My name is Saxon. I am your camera class host, and today is going to be the intermediate camera class. Let me pull up that presentation. Thank you again for being here. Thanks for being patient with me. Again, technical difficulties. Couldn't, for some reason, get the sound to go through, and I'm still a little fishy on that myself. So let me turn the decibels down a little bit so I'm not blasting in your ears this whole time, because I really don't need to be. But yeah, welcome. Intermediate camera class. I'm your host, Saxon. I work in the small electronics department. I consider myself one of our camera specialists here. And today's camera class, we're going to be doing intermediate camera knowledge. So we talked last week about the automatic settings and how to basically set your camera to auto and let it do the work for you. Today we're going to dig a little bit past that. We're going to figure out what it is that you as a photographer need to know in order to get things going, especially when it comes to manual settings, aperture priority, shutter priority, that sort of thing. Afterwards, we'll then discuss a little bit about lenses and talk about that. But as always, as you guys start to have questions, chat, answer away, or ask away at any questions that you have. I've changed the format up of how I present this in a sense, where I've now kind of made the presentation a little smaller on the screen. This should avoid my little square in the bottom here, blocking out the bottom right or top corners. So let's get started. Pop up my presentation. So, intermediate camera knowledge. So why go point and shoot, DSLR or mirrorless? This is a big question that I always ask people, especially when they're first getting into this or when they are ready to buy a camera. I like to see, what is it about a camera that interests you and why? I mean, when you think about it, we have these amazing devices in our pockets nowadays that take beautiful photos. They simplify the reason that why we don't need a camera around our neck at all times anymore. We have a phone in our pocket at all times. So why would you want a camera? And the answer is pretty simple. You're someone who wants to get a better image quality than what the phone is producing. You're someone who likes to use something that has more purpose to it, more meaning, more not collaboration, but more settings maybe to play with. You want to be in control of your images more. Maybe you are looking to take pictures of a newborn child, grandson, maybe a family member's daughter, son. Maybe you have a kid who's in sports and you want to take pictures and videos for a highlight reel. Maybe you are a realtor and you want to take indoor photos of, the houses and the buildings that you're showing. You're going to want to use something that's a camera. You're going to not want to use your cell phone. You want something that has better image production, better coloration, better image quality, the ability to make images big. That's something that you can't really do with a cell phone. It requires a camera. So reasons to go could be multitudes, but there's always definitely a reason to have a camera versus a phone. A phone will do great, but not nearly as great as a camera. And we'll discuss a little bit more. So one of the first things I start off with is this idea of a snapshot versus a photograph. And I preface it this way, and I used two images. One was taken by a camera, the other one was taken by a phone. This one will be taken by a phone. It's a quick picture. Things don't look even on the picture. The lighting isn't really good. Coloration isn't anything to write home about. It's a very simple and, if I'm being honest, a boring, plain picture. We move over to the next one, and now we have something that has a little more oomph to it. You have reflection bouncing from the metals and the actual belts of the escalator. You have the sky color that's more saturated. The lights that are illuminating the sky and adding to the fixtures of the walls, those cast a really nice hue. You have this nice vignette where you got nice light in the center and it gets darker on the sides. These are all bits and pieces that add to the photograph and make it pop, make it look nice. So when we look at them, a photograph and a snapshot can be characterized by intention, thought, and the way of which we went about it. So the intention here might have just been to show maybe where you're at to a friend. Oh, where you're located. Boom, you take a quick picture. This is a great snapshot. This, though, has more oomph to it, and if I'm being honest, this could pass as a nicer photograph. This could be something that you maybe put into an art show or you're doing something with, whereas this is maybe something that's for reference, something that shows you maybe a location or a scouting position of where you'd like to take photos at. So when we think of a snapshot and we think of a photograph, we need to think of one as a kind of training source, maybe a source of inspiration or a beginning step. And we need to think of the other one as a processed image that is meant to either excite or intrigue or have a multitude of different emotions. The very first step, and I mentioned this earlier in the first class as well too, is make sure you know your camera and learn it. There's so many cameras out there, and I use this chart to kind of illustrate that point. It doesn't matter if you're coming from Sony, Nikon, Canon, Fuji, Olympus, Panasonic, all these brands, Leica, all these brands have directions. And it's important that you read those directions and understand how the camera works, operates, and where things are. If you don't start there, you don't start with that, getting into the next set of things can be always a little confusing because now you're questioning, now where do I find all this stuff? You might understand the mechanics of the camera and how it all works. I have a lot of people that have been shooting for years, but they get a brand new camera and they're very confused to start. They're like, I don't understand how to use this. So it's always important. First step, learn your camera, take the time to read about it, take the time to practice too. One thing is to learn and know, but the other thing is to actually get out there and put these things into practice to really understand and grasp all the knowledge you're taking in. So first thing we'll go through is a RAW versus JPEG, or JPEG or RAW. We could think of it this way. Your JPEG is your standard issue. It's what you're going to see for all photos for the most part. If Bob and Sue go on vacation and they're taking pictures, they're probably most likely going to take them as a JPEG. Now, JPEGs come as a compressed file and they're usually a little stagnant. RAW files come in a little bit more muted, but when you look closely you can see the fine I'm sorry guys, it'll be a long one. There's nobody in class with me today and I don't have a lot of viewers right now on the website, so anybody who's watching this in the future, I do apologize for the yawns. A JPEG though is a compressed file. A RAW file is a non-compressed. What you can do with the RAW file is process it. You can go through and change color balance, hues, saturation, levels. You can do a multitude of editing to a RAW photo that necessarily won't have the same effect as a JPEG. And by doing that, you create something that's more robust, more round, more in the now. So when we look at through the three photos, your RAW on the left is probably your most plain. Little to no coloration. Shadows are there, but they're not dark. You get an idea of the image, but it almost feels washed out. Move to the next one, the right one, that is the JPEG. You can start to see color on the shirt. You start to see more information on the guitar, the fingers, his hair, his glasses. And then when you move to the furthest right, you've got the process RAW, which shows off all of the best features in the character and in the actual photo. Again, both are great, but both have their time and place. If you are someone who's an intermediate to an advanced photographer, I probably would tell you to look at the process RAW and look at the RAW file. If you are a starter, JPEG is great. Stick with JPEG, learn JPEG. You won't regret learning JPEG. And it also doesn't take a lot of work with JPEG. If you do want to edit anything in JPEG, you can do that. And that's all available through whatever service you want to use to edit. So if that's Adobe, if that's Apple, if that's Windows, you can edit a JPEG, just not in the same way you can edit a RAW. So for those who want to get the most out of their photos, RAW is definitely the way to go. For those that want to send a vacation photo to their buddies, their friends, their girlfriends, JPEG is definitely probably the easiest way to go. Some editing software, we have Photoshop, we have Flickr, and then we also have DaVinci. DaVinci is more of a video editing software, but I have a lot of customers who've said good things about their photo software. Flickr I don't know too much about, and then obviously Photoshop, great tool. So I talked a little bit about last week about the mode dial and what it means to understand the mode dial, and we're going to break it down a little bit more today, but every camera, unless it's a certain point and shoot model, has a mode dial. You switch through the different modes in order to access what you're trying to get. So the next steps that you probably want to learn after automatic is going to be program auto. And program auto I might have talked about a little bit. That's the P on the camera. Program auto is going to let you program what settings you want auto and what you don't want auto. So let's say that you want ISO auto, but you want to control the rest. You can do that. Every time you go back to program auto, it should automatically be there. Every setting that you had in the program setting will transfer over, and that'll continuously be only under the program setting. Aperture priority, shutter priority, and full manual are the three big ones that we're going to cover today. Everything's listed as the exposure triangle here. So starting with it, we have aperture, shutter, and ISO. Aperture starts like this. The higher the number in aperture, the less open the metal shutters are. So at an f/22, we have not a pin needle, but a pretty small, maybe a pencil tip wide shutter. That is going to be great for when we want to do background and foreground pictures. So like the diagram shows, we have a person standing in front of a pyramid. They are taking a picture. For the most part, we probably want to include the pyramid there because we want to be able to show both the person and the pyramid. It just adds to the photo. As we continuously lower that number, though, we slowly start to not see the pyramid anymore. We only see our character. That is because of background to foreground separation, and that's something Aperture is really good at. Aperture will, for the most part, blur out the background and bring focus to the foreground. Reasons that might be important: portraiture work where background isn't important or it doesn't add to the character or to the subject that you're taking pictures of. Maybe you're with the family and you're not in front of the most attractive building, but it's just a picture of the family. You don't really care about the building. You might want to turn your f-stop as far down as it goes and see how much of that it blocks out. Most kit lenses are going to be anywhere between a 2.8 to, I'd say, about a 6. Most premium lenses are going to be an f.2 to f.8, and then most really, really good lenses are going to be 1.2, 1.4. It's all dependent on the class. Some examples here of our shutter or our aperture priority. If you look at the background, you can see that the items are blurred behind it, but the main focus and the main subject matter that is in our foreground, that is not blurry. So the squirrel is pretty good, and the dog's nose on the front is pretty good. We're blurring out the Rottweiler mix in the background. This is another example of the aperture priority. Here we're blurring out the background, but because we have lights behind the background, we have this feature called bokeh. And bokeh is really cool because it can add a bit of flair to your photos. In this case, those lights behind Emmett there from Lego Movie are technically Christmas lights. And because we have our aperture turned to probably a 1.4, 1.2, we're able to block out those lights, but make them blurry enough that they turn into just dots. I think it's a pretty cool thing that you can do. Why use portrait priority mode? Or why use aperture priority mode, should I say? And it's for portraits. That's where I was going with that. If you're someone who's taking pictures of others and you want to get the cleanest, most detail-oriented photo, you probably don't want to put them in a rocky mountain situation with the water behind them and all this other stuff. The images will come out great, most likely, but you're in a scene that would require both the background and the foreground. You probably want to be using this for, I like the resume idea, headshots. You're using this for times where the background doesn't matter and it's all about the subject matter. The two can go hand in hand as well, but then you want to start using a higher aperture for that one. And then to review it, you can see as we progressively move down the chain of command. For the f-stop, we start at f32 and we go to f2.8. You can see it slowly getting more and more blurry as we continue to move forward. So f32 being the most wide, we can see the background and the foreground together. We can see the blue garbage can, which is what I tell people to look at all the time. Same thing with f16. f6, now we start to lose it, and f2.8 is completely gone. So shutter speed is our next priority. That is going to be the TV, if you will. That's what they call it on there. There's aperture priority, that's your AP, and then there's TV, that's your shutter priority. So shutter priority is simple. The faster an object is moving, the faster you want the shutter to close because you want to get as much of that information as possible. If this person were running the same amount of time 9 times in a row, you have 1 in 500, and that would be a slow, that would be a fast pace, pretty quick, not bad. 1 in 250, same boat. Really, the 1 till about 1/30th is pretty good. Once you get to 1/15th and onward, now you're really slowing down, and so now it becomes 1/15th of a second, 1/8 of a second, 1/4 of a second, and half a second. So that being said, if you have wobbly hands or you don't have the best grip on your camera, a tripod, a monopod might be the next best move for you. That's going to help you keep stability while you're shooting, but then also use a faster shutter speed. Other times you might want to use a shutter speed have been racing, sports, bikes, hockey. Let's say you're on a cruise. Anything where movement is involved is where you'd really want to consider shutter speed to be your main priority. Whenever we're trying to get a freezing action, so the surfer guy on the right side, we want to do at least at 1 in 1,000th or faster. That's going to ensure that we actually get the image, we get the person, and we don't necessarily get a lot of blurriness. When you think about it, when you have a moment that's going so quickly that you need to turn your shutter speed to that, you only have a few seconds to really comprehend all of that going in, and by that time, you have to react. So it's important to remember that when we're taking a picture, we can't recreate it a lot of the times when it's action photography like this. So we want to make sure we get it the first time. So freezing actions, I would say use 1 in 1,000th or faster, you'll be fine. So why does shutter speed matter? It gives a sense of motion. If anybody's ever seen a woodpecker, their wings are so fast it's unbelievable how you can't see them. But what makes them so unique is that when they're flying, they almost stay completely still, their bodies, and it's just their wings that are going. I can only imagine having to live next door to that and listen to it all the time, but very cool. Creating mood with long exposures. So let's say that you have a camera and you want to set it for long exposure. I didn't bring any cameras with me. Let me check one place real quick. So on the camera itself, there is a switch called B. B will set the camera to bulb. And back in the day, what would happen is you would allow for the reflex on the camera, the single reflex, to open, and it would stay open for as long as you wanted. And you would just basically hold the B button down, or the button down, the trigger, and it would continue to go. Nowadays, we don't have that anymore. What they do in the shutter speed options is you can set your camera to B, which is bulb, which will keep the camera open continuously for as long as you want. And you can get things like this beautiful waterfall photo. Why might this be something that you want? It depends on where you're at, depends on where you're going, depends on the type of environment you're in. Also depends on the gear you bring. A long exposure photo should not be done without a tripod. I cannot say that enough. Depending on what you're shooting at, I recently told the customer that I believe anything slower than 1 1/100th of a second should be done on a tripod. Anything slower than that, you got to do it on a tripod. You're going to get shaky grips, you're going to get blurry photos, things aren't going to look right. So to avoid yourself on that confusion and that headache, I would recommend get a tripod if you plan on doing things like this. But this was done simply by putting the camera down, setting everything they wanted, and doing the longer exposure. When we look at it, we can see the greens, the nature around the water is nice, there's no blurriness to it, it's saturated, the rocks have shadows and peaks and color, and it's awesome. The water itself has a little bit of a blurriness to it, and that's because the water's traveling in multiple directions, never the same one. So because of that, we're going to see little stragglers that won't look proper, or maybe some just bits and pieces that just don't look right on the water itself. But when we cut through the water, we see the rock formations underneath, and it looks really pretty. So long exposures can help really create mood, bring out more dramaticism, and also extremely helpful, it improves the color, because the longer the exposure, the more information the camera is able to pick up. Therefore, the better image we're going to get. Another long exposure example, again, this was probably set up either on a tripod or on some sort of bench. And by doing that, they have the ability of pulling the trigger, being in front of the camera. The bike looks great, the wall looks great, the platform looks great, but the train is in complete motion, and it looks cool. So let's see. Why use shutter priority mode? I use the photo on the bottom as my leading example for that. If you are a photographer and you're really trying to capture motion, you're trying to capture energy, using a shutter speed is drastically important. It's going to do all of the things that you really need it to do as far as freezing the image and grabbing that still. Where this plays into something like your aperture is that your aperture being open or more closed is what allows the light in. By doing that, that then kind of has a direct impact on the shutter. Back in the world of film, the way that it would work was that your film would be labeled with whatever the ISO basically would be on there. It could be Kodak 800, Kodak 100, Kodak 300, Ilford 200, and that would be the ISO range that you had on it. Still the way that it's done. So with ISO now in the digital camera world is a little bit different. But the shutter and the... what was the other one? The shutter and the aperture priority. Oh, Jesus. I forgot what I was going. My apologies, everybody. Well, the shutter priority is important. It's what's really going to give you the full control of the speed of the camera, and when you have your subject matter going in such a way where they're moving at a faster rate or a fast pace, you want to make sure you're using shutter over aperture. I think that's the direction that I was going in. Aperture is great when you have background to foreground separation. Oh, I was talking about film and then, never mind. So with film, your ISO is already dictated for you. Your shutter and your aperture came into play because your shutter dictated the speed at which it was going to grab that image, and your aperture was the foreground to background, but also it was letting all the light in. ISO now plays a new modern role, and we'll explain that in the next one. But it's important to understand that if you are someone who's experiencing problems with photos and they look like this on the bottom, you're probably going to want to use your shutter priority the most. Shutter priority is what's going to help you get more still, meaningful, beautiful photos without catching all the blurriness around there. Aperture is going to make sure that it blocks the background or presents the background, and it's going to give you access to background and foreground separation. Another example of why shutter might be important for this, you're moving something like this, I probably would recommend to do at least 1 1,000th shutter speed just for how fast the bike is going and how fast the biker is. And you could tell they did this in a fashion like that because when you look at the bike, you can actually see the tires not rotating, not blurry, not being moved. So you can tell that they shot it at such a time where they didn't need all that, or where they were able to get that information. And then the last thing we'll talk about in the category of the three, and then I'll kind of sum up how the three come together again. ISO. ISO, like I said, in the film world, it used to be the type of film that you had, the number that was on the film, that was your ISO. ISO is going to equate as the amount of light brought into the camera and how maybe illuminated your photo becomes. Now, there's another thing called exposure compensation. That's a whole different thing, and I'm not going to really get into that, but if anybody ever has questions on it, please feel free to reach out. I'll have my email, my phone number later. We started ISO 100, and we can see how dark the image is. We don't get a lot of lights, and overall what we're getting out of there is a very dark and undersaturated photo. ISO 200, now we've got a little bit more light. We can see that sun coming through the back pier there. It looks brighter. For 400, we got more sunlight, a little more on the water, and the shadow underneath the bridge is starting to cut a little bit. As well, too, the beach is lighting up, or lightening up. The next one, over 800, you've got the beautiful skyline, you've got everything. The color looks really saturated, it looks nice. You can see the beach, you can see the water. So that's kind of what the main difference between ISO is. If you're looking for something more moody, dark, or maybe it's bright summertime, a lower ISO is great. If it's nighttime, you're looking for something to make light, or you want to edit light in somehow, turning up the ISO a little bit more will help allow you to illuminate your photo more, which then could help you do things like editing or maybe coloration. But your ISO controls how much light comes into the camera, and it plays a big part of how your camera will function and operate, especially since it lives on the exposure triangle. ISO also equates to noise, and it's important to remember that. A lot of people think that, oh, I'm turning up this, so, what is that going to do? What that does is it's going to take the outside world around you and make it a little bit grainier. Grain isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it definitely isn't the best. People will call them noisy, pixelated. The idea behind it is that when you're shooting your camera with a lower ISO, the camera itself isn't allowing too much light to come in, and it's not trying to overcompensate for, the shutter or the aperture. When you're using a noisier ISO, let's say you jack up the ISO to 9,000 and you go outside during the day and take a photo, you're going to notice these gray dots because you've basically made the sensor take a very, very dark photo in a light area. Auto ISO, when to use it? I recommend using it almost all the time. ISO to me is one of those few settings where, as much as I love the ISO setting, I would much rather control shutter or aperture priority. Oof, thank you. Little back crack there. I would much rather control shutter or aperture priority. Only reason being is because with ISO, if I'm in and out of different venues, I always paint the picture like this. I had a mom who came in who was getting ready to do homecoming photos for her daughter, and she bought a camera, and she was asking me what I recommended she do. and I told her to do an aperture priority setting. Shutter wasn't necessary because the people she was taking photos were just walking around places. They weren't running or doing sports or doing any crazy activities. And 2, ISO is going to change, and the number for ISO will change as you go indoor, outdoor, and around in all these different settings and different rooms where light doesn't come in, light does come in. So the game of ISO, for me, I usually think it's better to let the camera decide. The camera has internal sensors that are awesome, that really do sense out the room through the viewfinder and help you optimize the light inside the camera. If you're not going to use auto ISO and you want to control it, just start playing with it at first. I usually think that a speed of, or an ISO of 800 to 100 is a good one to go with. I personally like 800 because it makes my photos just a little bit grainier, and I think that overall that graininess is an endearing factor for at least my photography. It makes me feel like the photography that I'm shooting on has more of a film-like quality because of the ISO being turned up a little bit higher. And then to review, so my chart makes it pretty simple. When we look at f16, we can see the piggies and we can see the full background. As we continue to go down the scale, once we get to f1.4, the background starts to fade away, and now we are just left with the piggies. In perfect clarity, I should say. I do not have the pigs here in the store. The hammer coming down is to show off shutter. The faster in which that the hammer is coming down, the faster we want to turn our shutter speed. This will ensure that we get a good image. It's not blurry. Yeah, well, that's kind of it. Saturation plays a big thing in ISO too. But the ISO overall. Oh gosh, no, shutter. My apologies. Oh geez, I'm jumping off topic there. This is what happens when I don't have anybody to talk to. Get a little sleepy. Shutter is going to control how fast these things are going. We want to do a fast shutter speed based on how fast the object is moving. So for the full hammer swing that's coming down, the 1 in 1,000 is perfect. That should capture the image perfectly and prevent it from blurrying up or looking distorted or looking like it's been moving. As we then cut down the row and we slow that speed down, we're going to notice that the hammer is starting to become more blurry. We're starting to lose focus of it, and by the time we get to half a second, we barely can make out that's a hammer and a fist. The board stays the same, and that's fine because the board itself is stationary, so it should stay the same throughout the 4 photos. But you can see the faster shutter speed also makes things get darker in the photos too. It's another thing to keep in mind when you're getting ready. And then last is ISO. I got ahead of myself on the last one. ISO is then again going to control your level of darkness or level of lightness, and then your grain. So when we look at ISO 100, we'll see the perfect pink penny and we'll see the black background. And then as we keep going, we see the penny get lighter and lighter, more almost white goldish, less copperish, and then the background also starts to lose its color, or the table starts to lose its color. I talked about exposure meters, but an exposure meter basically lives on the very bottom of the camera. When you look through the viewfinder or you're in the LCD screen, you'll notice this. When the tick mark being one of these guys, is in the center, then depending on what we set our exposure triangle to, the exposure meter will go from one direction to the other. So if it goes minus, that means that you need to either turn down your shutter speed and go a little slower, turn down your aperture and make it a little less wide, or turn your ISO down a little bit. Now let's say that it's at the -1. It means it's too dark. It's getting darker. And you can continuously teeter on both lines. If you want to go higher, if you want to go lower. The higher you go, the lighter the photo will get. The lower you go, the darker your photo will get. And it communicates to your ISO and aperture, but it's almost a secondary to that. It's the way that you would then look through the camera and pinpoint where you're at and make slight adjustments as needed without having to physically take the camera from your face, play with everything, then put it back up. This keeps you engaged, allows you to continue to play, allows you to turn the dial and make sure that you've got the camera set to exactly what you need. Full manual is pretty self-explanatory. That's control over the whole camera. Every bit and piece that we just talked about, aperture, f-stop, ISO, you control all that. Shutter priority, that's the TV. You're only controlling the shutter. AP is your aperture priority, and you're only controlling your aperture. Some examples of that so we can kind of break it down. I will go through and tell you what I see. ISO on this one is probably going to be somewhere between a 200 and a 300. I would say the photo itself isn't that grainy. There's good saturation, good color, so I definitely would put that there. As far as shutter goes, I could see this being a longer exposure just for how saturated the buildings are. Could be a bulb exposure and could have been done for a hot minute, but I imagine it's more half a second, but I could be wrong. Next, then we would have shutter. Aperture. You can see the whole thing and the background, so I really wouldn't put this as a high number. Probably would say closer to 22 or 18. We have a nice flower in the background here. The background's pretty blurred, so I would say that our aperture is probably somewhere between a 4, 2.8 maybe, and it's blurring out the background pretty good. The flowers in the foreground look great. We can see them in full detail. Their color looks good. As far as graininess is concerned, we have a little bit of grain, so I probably would put the ISO a little too high for what it's worth. Maybe it's at a 600 ISO. The background itself is blurred, but not too blurred, so maybe not a 1.4, not a 2.8, maybe a 4. I'd say the f-stop is 4 because you can see the background, you know what it is, but it's not in clear focus, it's not in clear detail. Next we have our fireman. The background, we have another fireman in the background. He's in good detail, he's close. Shutter's quick, maybe he's on the walk, but this feels kind of staged. So if I had to guess shutter, I probably would put it at like 1 250th of a second. As far as color goes, it's very well done and nice and saturated, so that's good. I probably would say aperture, I probably would put it at 2.8. Background's blurred enough that you can make out the character, but you can't necessarily see his face, so you don't have the details of that. Shutter, I'm going to stick to 1 250th of a second. ISO, because of the saturation of the color, I'm going to say it's somewhere around the 800, maybe a little lower than that. This beautiful RAM. Detail looks good. I probably would say shutters might be fast only because it's an animal, and unless this is a domesticated or tamed animal, sometimes rams can be not the best or not the nicest. So my imagination says this is a faster shutter, but also the detail in the horns leads me to believe it's probably a little bit slower. So for the safe side, I'm going to say it's 1 250th of a second. The aperture itself, there's not a lot of blur on the background to foreground, so I probably would put this closer to like 22-18, probably 18-ish as my aperture. ISO. Not a lot of blur on the photo, nor is there a lot of graininess. The coloration is nice and saturated, so I probably would put this, and it doesn't look like it's too dark out. maybe a 400 to 800 ISO, just for the dramatization of it, so we don't lose the color that is the ram's horns and the fur. These are one of my favorites. I like to use the dog catch ones. So you have two dogs catching frisbees. This was obviously more of a shutter priority. Shutter for both of these, I would say, is at least 1 in 1,000. Dog on the left, I would say aperture wise, it's probably going to be f2.8 to f1.4. Really blurs the background out there. You can still kind of make out that those are cars in the background, but unless you're paying attention and looking really closely, I don't know if you would really notice those, or at least call them cars. When we look at the one on the right, we have just the background trees being blurred out. So maybe I'd say 2.8. 2.8 background, so that way it blurs a little bit, but you still know what those are. Those are trees, obviously. Yeah. Now we got our football player diving into the end zone. Another one that I like, just because you can see the players in the background that miss the tackle. They're not completely blurry, but the background as you go further back is. So whatever the range or field of focus is with this one, it's a little bit tighter. Shutter is definitely 1 in 1,000. Aperture is probably going to be 18, maybe 16. And then the ISO, it's an outdoor game. I probably would put the ISO at maybe 300. It really wouldn't need to be that high of an ISO, just given that they're at an outdoor stadium with good lighting that's going inside the field there. I would say ISO is all based on light. So for me, I keep my ISO at a consistent number so that my photos all look consistent across the board. And I like that 800 number. For me and my grainy photos, it works. So shutter, aperture, and ISO. the customers who come in to buy cameras, who trust us with their stuff, they feel like they're getting something out of this purchase and this investment. So attend classes, be prolific, join different workshops, join groups, learn from other people as you're going to go. It's a great way to get into it. And YouTube channels. YouTube has a variety of amazing channels out there dedicated to one camera, dedicated to one brand of cameras. I mean, it could even be as simple, and I tell customers this all the time, Google when you get a chance, 10 things I didn't know about my camera, and the amount of things that you're going to find out that you had no clue about is tremendous. Lastly, travel. Go everywhere in the world that you can. Visiting new places opens us up to new environments, and new environments, especially as a photographer, require learning, because when you learn your environment through the eye of photography, you really can take that talent anywhere that you want. So develop that, work on that. It's a great thing to have. And when you travel, bring your camera. Other recommended accessories that you most likely have to pay for, regardless of the other ones: bag, an extra battery, and a memory card. So those top three, these two on the very top are the ones I recommend for everybody. You should definitely have a bag to store this thing. You should not be just carrying this camera out willy-nilly. There can be a lot of problems that occur, and if you smash this thing up, it does not get repaired quickly. Extra battery and a memory card. We talk about this in my very first class in camera basics, but you should have a memory card and you should have a extra battery. You should have multiple SD cards, multiple batteries. In case something fails, doesn't work, in the long run of things, you want to make sure that you have it so that you always have a backup contingency plan, just in case. Lens cleaning kits. I just did the Chicago Polar Bear Plunge 2 weeks ago. I took the photos for it. One of the things that I regret was not bringing my rag with me because I had so many people splashing. But that's a great example of having a lens kit on you at all times, even if it's just a microfiber cloth. Anything that you can do to wipe down the glass, it will be really helpful. Strap, that usually comes with the camera, but you can get more comfy ones. There's tripods that I've recommended. Hard drives, we went over that last week. Polarizing filter, ND filters, additional filters. All filters are great. They they don't necessarily need you to use a lens hood because of that. So that's a nice feature. And they do a lot of light blocking, and they take away the harshness of the sun or of the light as it penetrates the camera, so you get better photos overall. Date your body, marry your glass. So this last section that we talk about here in class is all about your lenses. And this is my age-old, tried and true saying: you better marry your lenses, because you want to invest, I'd say, 70% of your purchase of a camera into the lenses. Your lenses will continue to be valid and valuable as you continue to build your system up. If you stick with all Canon, Canon's got a new adapter that'll convert EF to RF lenses. Nikon's got an adapter that's F to Z. Sony hasn't changed their lenses yet, so those are all still E-mount, and they don't have any plans to change any. So I always tell customers, if you're a Sony person and you buy a lens here, you go on vacation and you see one in Japan or in China or somewhere else that you really like and you want it, that lens will work with your camera no matter what. So it's an awesome thing to have. Date your body. Your camera body in the long scheme of things should last you about 10 years, and then it'll start to clunk out. So it's important that if you're someone who's budgeting, find a friendly way where you can spend more on the glass, less on the body. Focal length and zoom, they equate to the same thing, and they're basically the same. From 70 millimeters out, we can see the geese. They just kind of look like a pile of white marshmallows. At 105 millimeters out, we can now get a little bit closer. We can see the space in between the geese. At 200 millimeters out, we can now see the space in between the geese, and we can see necks on the animals. We can tell what they are a little bit better. And then finally, at 400 millimeters, we can see the necks, the fur, the beaks, the feathers and the wings as they're moving there. So we get more perception as we zoom in. The better quality lens you have, the better resolution you're going to get, and the sharper of an image you're going to get. But when you were dealing with a telephoto lens, it's important to remember that the higher the number goes, the better zoom that you'll have. Now, when we talk about the zoom, we also then should call it by its real name, focal length, and that's the mm. It's millimeters. The focal length dictates the viewing angle of which we have, and then also dictates what our subject matter will look like. And I always consider this the plump and thin line. The lower the number is, the more wide the angle is. When taking a picture of somebody, the face will become more narrow and they become a little bit more cheekboned. 50 millimeters are probably the truest to nature as far as a lens is concerned. We call it the nifty 50, and I'll show that on another slide. The 35 is also considered pretty good. It's a street lens. It's a walking around everyday kind of lens. So some people really like the 35 millimeter, and I do as well too. I own a 35 and a few others. What lenses do you truly need? So the first one right off the bat, I have your kit lens. Your kit lens is going to get you out of a lot of jams. It's your way of starting, and typically with the kit lens, it gives you this idea of what you might want to get into. An 18 to 55 millimeter lens is a wide angle into more of a portrait. And what I like about that is that you as a photographer, you have the option of going in both directions. If you want something that will be a little more wide angle so you can get the entire viewing angle, you've got the 18 millimeters. If you want something tighter because maybe your son and daughter just had a soccer championship and you want to get a picture of them, that's where the 50 would come in. Now the numbers on there, the aperture is the lowest f-stops on there, and that's something I didn't mention. All cameras can go, or all lenses can go to f/22, but not all lenses can go to f/1.4. The better quality lenses, typically more expensive, are going to have a lower aperture number. So if you're someone who does enjoy shooting in aperture, it might be worth looking into an aperture priority based lens with a higher ISO. It might be better looking into a smaller aperture lens. Nothing to do with ISO. I'm getting all the word vomited now. But regardless, the kit lens does serve a purpose. It's your kit lens, it's your starter lens. I would recommend getting it just to learn what you like about the camera to start with. But some people are picky and they only want to go body only. So understandable. You could wait. The next lens that I would recommend if you're going to go body only and you're going to collect your lenses is the Nifty 50. The Nifty 50 is a great lens, it's a powerful lens, and it takes a really good portrait photo with little to no distortion or other garbage, if you will. A lot of the other lenses, like we saw in that focal length picture I showed you, depending on what number you get, you're going to get a little bit of distortion. 50 is going to be the most true to accurate version of the person you're taking a picture of. So the 50 is a really good one to go with. Better quality 50 you get, the better background to foreground separation you're going to get. It's important to remember. Now we looked at a zoom and a prime, and now it's in time we should talk about that. That 18 to 55 being a zoom is true. It's a small zoom. We would call it a short telephoto instead of a super telephoto, but it still is a telephoto in a sense. The prime lenses are what the 50 was, and so the way I describe it, a zoom lens can switch between multitudes of numbers. It can go from a 15 to 55. You'll see some zooms that are 100 to 400, some zooms that are 18 to 100. There's a bunch of different ones, but a zoom lens will have multiple numbers, and you can toggle between the numbers. A prime lens stays at one number consistently, and it's only that. So a 50 millimeter prime, a 35 millimeter prime, a 15 millimeter prime, a 100 millimeter prime. Those are all examples of lenses that you can't switch the number, but you can change the aperture, and they'll stay at that consistent. Now, why do I want a prime lens over a kit lens? The prime lenses typically will have a better aperture. From my understanding, when it comes to telephoto lenses, the lowest aperture you can purchase for almost every lens is a 2.8 millimeter lens, which is no problem with that, but it's not necessarily going to give you as much background separation as a 1.4. So that's your trade-off. Great camera, great lenses, very versatile in the fact that you can zoom and play with it. But there is a reason why prime lenses do the best in a lot of markets, because they give you a little more flexibility, but then it also requires you to change out your lenses more often. My trinity of lenses, if I had to give a customer a list of what I would recommend. Now, I goofed up on this one, and I'm going to explain in a little bit, but I goofed up with the photos, I should say. When we start at the left, actually, the three main lenses for the trinity should be a small telephoto, a 50 prime, and a big telephoto or super telephoto. My small telephoto would be my 18 to 35 millimeter on the top. That should give me everything from a nice wide angle shot to something a little bit tighter. And we want that so that we have more versatility. I get a lot of real estate people that want that type of lens. I get a lot of interior designers who want that lens. People who have business photos that they're trying to take, headshots, maybe product-based photos. That lens number has a good versatile effect. On the left corner, we have our 100 to 400 millimeter lens. That's our big telephoto zoom. That's going to give us the power we want to see the bird flying across the sky. Or maybe we see the ship in the harbor that's 600 feet away. We want to get a zoomed in photo. That's the kind of lens we want. And in the bottom right corner, that should be a nifty 50. That should be a 50 millimeter lens, but now that I'm looking at it, it is not. The 50 millimeter lens is your butter. It's everything. It's a great lens, powerful lens, and like I said earlier, it takes a clean portrait with little to no distortion, which I'd say for a majority of people, you want some form of portrait lens just in case. When I say portrait, it doesn't have to necessarily be my portrait or, your wife's or your daughter's or your husband's or, your cousins or brothers or sisters. It doesn't have to be a portrait. The 50 millimeter might be perfect for a family vacation. When you're walking around, you take a picture of things. People like 35 millimeter for that reason, because the 35 is a little bit more wide and you get a little bit more of a field of view. So again, everyone's a little different. One of the things I can absolutely recommend to anybody, especially if you're local and you're by the store, bring your camera in, try different lenses on. Experience in an environment what the lenses would look like and how they feel in your hands. A lot of the times that will help dictate what you need. Also, when you buy a camera, buy the kit lens, go take a bunch of photos and figure out what you don't like about it. I feel like a lot of people, a lot of the times, they have an idea of what they want based on other photos people have taken, but they can't articulate to me what it is they want. So we always have a little bit of a hard time. The people I've helped the most inside the store are the people that come in with photos that they've taken. They say, hey, I took this over the weekend, or I took this on vacation. I love it, but I need it to go more wide, or I need to zoom in more, or I need something that does better against light and UV. That's where we can find something for you, and I can kind of guide you in the right direction. So I would say overall, if you're getting into this and you need to know what accessories or what other things that you need, these would be the three lenses that I would start with if you don't want to get the kit lens. Or I'd at least recommend that you get the kit lens and then build into these other lenses, one of the two. The last thing, and I don't talk too much about it, is a travel lens. It's the fourth lens in the trinity. It would be kind of at the very bottom of the list, very, very bottom, and sometimes I group this in with the telephoto lenses, but travel lenses are all in one. That's what you can also call it. So this is an 18 to 135 millimeter lens. 18 being your wide angle, 135 being your zoom. Something this would be good for would be, let's say you're going on safari, you're nervous about bringing all your lenses with you. It adds to the weight of the bag. You don't want to have to lug that around. You most likely then want to bring a travel lens, something that does it all. That way you don't have to switch lenses, you don't have to worry about gunk getting inside the actual mounting system, you don't have to worry about dirtying the lenses up. You keep the lenses pristine, but at the same time, you have the ability now to use one lens rather than 3 or 4. So a travel lens can come in handy, but a lot of people don't need it. Some people don't care for it. Personally, I bring 2 lenses with me wherever I go. I bring my 18 to 55 and I bring my 35 millimeter. I like the 35 because I don't have to mess with it. I just kind of point and shoot and it does really good. I bring my 18 to 55 because I like the variability, and for me, I don't need to zoom and look at anything too far away. I can really just kind of get to where I need to be and then frame it up. That's how I function with my camera, but everyone's a little bit different. So that's important to remember, and you got to get what you like, and you have to experiment first, because what might work for one person will not work for everybody. But it's important that you discover that through practice and trial and error. So getting a camera, I'd recommend get the kit lens, play with it, make sure you like it, see what you don't like about it, and see what else would then help you get what you're trying to get. And if you're confused on that and you're just brand new, write these things down and come into the store, go into any camera shop and ask them that question before you buy the lenses. Can I try this on my camera to see this is what I'm trying to accomplish and this is what I'm getting out of the photos that I have? How do I fix that? That's what you're looking for. And that's it, everybody. Thanks for paying attention. I am sorry that I was getting a little bit sleepy on the camera here. It is tough when I don't have anybody in class with me. I can feel I keep talking and I'm just losing wind and getting sleepy there. So thank you for bearing with me. Thanks for not yelling at me in the chat about sleeping. But all of my past camera classes are up on the YouTube page here, so you're always able to see anything I've done in the past. Next week we will be off, so next Thursday, drum roll please, the 16th, we will have no class. We will return on the 23rd, February 23rd, the last Thursday of the month, for our basic drone class. We're going to go over the basics of drones, flying, how to take good videos, how to frame things up, shots that you can take, and some cool breakdowns of the drone. But regardless, I put my email, I put my phone number on there. I tell every class and I tell everybody here in the store, reach out to me with any questions that you have. Cameras are confusing. We have these beautiful phones in our pockets now that just do almost everything for us. So it becomes one of those things where, what do we need a camera for? Why do we need this? It's because we're after the best quality photo that we can get. We're after using something that's not a cell phone, that doesn't function as a phone, it functions as a camera. We get better resolution, we get better quality. We have the ability to do things with photos from a camera that we can't necessarily do with a phone, as far as editing, color, saturation, hue, levels. There's a lot of cool things that we can do with photos that we're taking from the camera versus the phone. So anybody out there who's on the fence, I definitely recommend talk to me, give me a call, shoot me an email, or come into the store. Check out what we have to offer. We have every camera that we have to offer and sell, we have it on display, so that way you can actually hold it in your hand and get a feeling. And we do our darndest to make sure that every camera turns on and powers up. So if there's any reason you come in and a camera doesn't, just let us know. We'll take it down, we'll charge it for you. It only takes a couple minutes to get some batteries in there. But yeah, I will keep this open for another few minutes, guys. Ask questions as you have them. This is my longest class that I teach, and I do apologize in the beginning for the technical difficulties. It took me a little bit to figure out why my camera wasn't working, or why my microphone wasn't recording. So, yeah, feel free to ask some questions. I'll keep on for a little bit. Thanks for being here, guys. I appreciate it. I will admit, when I have people in the class asking questions, sometimes it's a little much because they'll cut off right when I'm telling people on here too. But I will say, having them like right there gives me someone to talk to, and I'm like, I can do this. I can stay a little more awake. Doing this by myself, where it's just me talking to the camera, it gets sleepy. I've had many cups of coffee today, many cups. So thank you guys for being patient with me and understanding. All right, well, it's been about an extra 5 minutes here. Nobody's really chatting any questions away. So I appreciate everybody for coming on. I appreciate everybody for being here to watch class again. 2 more weeks, we'll have drones. So February 23rd, catch me back here for the last Thursday of the month, and then we will get back in March to camera basics on the 2nd. So if anybody here wants to be there for the camera basics, we'll be doing it in store and online as always on March 2nd. No class next Thursday, and then we will have drones on the 23rd. So in 2 weeks. So have a good night, everybody. Email or call me if you have any questions, and as always, keep taking pictures, stay out there, and